3.
Welcome to Soulfire Wisdom with Kate Olson. As an evolving spirit and change adventure navigator, it is Kate's mission to empower and guide you on your path and inspire your truest passions. She will encourage you to share your gifts, speak your truth, and ignite your inner wisdom and purpose. She hopes to do so with a little humor and grace and her own soulfire passion. Kate talks with amazing guests who have embraced the pursuit and are fanning the flames of their own passion, purpose, and soulfire wisdom. Now here's your host, Kate.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Soulfire Wisdom and Tips, Tricks, and Triumphs Tuesday. So if this is your first time listening, I'm a hypnotherapist, life coach, Reiki master, and an NLP practitioner. But I like to call myself a change adventure navigator because I love guiding people through obstacles and adversity to find their path, purpose, and peace. So today, I would like to talk a little bit about calm because for me, I find that calm is my superpower. When I either, and I am calm most of the time, but when I either get angry, upset, or irritated about something, I don't like how it feels, for one thing. But the other thing about it is you're not really thinking clearly and you don't make the best decisions when you're in any of those states, irritation, frustration, or anger. So one of the things that I do to try to maintain that level calm, even when things that I don't want to be happening are happening. And that's usually when we have a hard time remaining calm, when something is happening that's out of our control, is first of all, I remind myself that it is out of my control. Like right now, I hired a landscaper and I paid him half up front. And now he isn't showing up to finish the rest of the job. And he did about an hour of work and then left, and keeps telling me that he'll come back at a specific time and doesn't come back. So obviously that's a little upsetting, irritating. But there is no way that I can control what this man does. I can only make decisions based on things that are within my control. I can do the rest of the work myself. I can call and hire somebody else to do it. But I cannot do anything to force that man to come back and do what he says he's going to do. So it doesn't make any sense for me to spend a lot of emotional energy being upset or frustrated with him. I don't know what's going on in his life, but I know that it's going to be better for me that if I deal with things that are within my control. So, being as part of what he's doing is fixing an irrigation system, and I don't know how to do that, I have to call someone else. The rest of the work I can probably do myself, although I didn't want to. So, being as I made a bad decision in hiring this man, I'll probably have to do a little bit of extra work. And next time, I'm not going to pay them half up front. So we have a great show planned for today. My guest is Lara Veleda Vesta, and she's an artist, author, storyteller, and an educator, transforming chronic illness into a path of healing and reclaiming. She's the author of the Moon Divas Guidebook, the Moon Divas Oracle, and the illustrator of the Moon Divas Oracle cards. And she has a newly released book, The Wild Soul Runes, Reawakening the Ancestral Feminine. And her research interests include an ancestral connection, myth telling, and disability as initiation. I'm having real pronunciation problems today. Currently, she's creating an illustrated guide to death transitions. Her path of myth, folk magic, and ancestral lore and the ritual practice is shared through classes in her Wild Soul School. So she's kind of on the what many people would consider the woo-woo side of of connecting with the soul. And my heart craves to know more about that side of things. So I'm really excited to have her on today and find out more about this whole realm. So hi, Lara.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm good today. Thank you.
So to start out with, can you tell us a little more about yourself and, kind of what led you to this path?
Oh gosh, that is a very, very long story and circuitous. I really go back to about a decade ago when this path opened up for me. I grew up in rural Southern Oregon and married really young, had 2 kids, and I've always been interested in folklore, storytelling, myth, all of these things, magic, but there weren't a lot at the time when I was a child. There wasn't a lot of information available at the Rogue River Public Library, which is where, where I grew up. And so about 10 years ago, I got divorced. I went through a major life transition, got divorced. I took a job 2 hours away from where my former husband lived, which meant leaving my children for the work week. And then eventually I did end up moving because I got a teaching job at a university. I was teaching writing. I had just finished my Master of Fine Arts in Writing and started this academic career path that I loved so much. And for a couple of years was really starting to become stable. I'd been an at-home mother before that and, was really feeling like I was living into my purpose. I was finding balance between my mothering and this career that I absolutely loved. And then I got sick. For about 2 years, I had an undiagnosed infection and that changed everything for me. I actually ended up having to leave my full-time job and I started doing other things. I didn't know that I was ill. That is a big part of this story, is that I spent a lot of years being very functionally ill and not knowing what was wrong with me. All my tests came back normal so I started doing more spiritual work with women. I was very interested in ritual and became educated as a celebrant and started looking at rites of passage. and reclaiming different aspects of myself. I went back to school. I was going to get my PhD in philosophy and religion, focusing on women's spirituality. And then I became too ill to do anything at all. And that was a turning point for me. That was a time where I really started to connect in with my ancestors, which had not been a big part of my path before. I'd been focused more on women's spirituality, kind of the goddess-centered spiritualities, and but really started to look into my own ancestral life ways and connecting in with some of their stories and methodologies, including the runes. I'd been exposed to the runes in childhood. My grandfather was from Norway, so I had them always in my periphery, but they came full force when I was ill, and I went through a big transformation. We lost everything. I mean, we had to leave our home. It turns out part of my illness was related to toxic mold, which,
Oh, my goodness.
yeah, it was really intense. And through that time, I found a new path that is a really old path that feels like it's always been there for me. And because of my chronic cyclic illness, which I did heal and then became ill again, and I've healed and become ill again, I'm learning to live with that as an initiatory process, as a cycle that I go through that actually brings me more in alignment with my spirituality. And I've learned to work with it and share that path with other people through my writing and through teaching. And
Okay.
that is what brings me here today.
Did they ever give you any kind of a diagnosis other than the toxic mold?
Yes, myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's a chronic fatigue syndrome.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've heard that term, but not the first one.
Yes.
Okay. So you mentioned that you connected first with runes in childhood. But how did you, was it actually through your illness that you reconnected then with them?
It was just prior to becoming, again, I was invisibly ill. So I was going through a major life transition. I felt like I couldn't sustain university teaching anymore. And it was around that time that I started connecting in with a community of seekers that were really invested in ancestral work and started to study the runes in community. And I have a pendant that my mother brought back from Norway when she was 18 that has runes on it that I'd loved as a child, and I wore all through high school, all through college. And so I knew some of the shapes, and I went to Norway when I was 24, and I was looking for something when I was there, but I didn't know what it was. And of course, it wasn't immediately visible. I connected with the land. I loved being there. I loved being around my family. But when I found the runes, when I started to connect in with them and connect in with this more animist idea of a life way, it really changed everything for me.
Okay, so that's kind of what the runes mean to you is.
Yeah, I see them as beings. I see them as pieces of the web of weird, the web that connects all life. And that comes from the myth of their origin and where they come from. They come from the well of the Norns and were taken up by Odin. So these little vibrational pieces of the web that connects everything have a lot of information. And by investigating them as beings and building relationship with them, one, it makes the journey really fun because animism is super fun. Because when you believe that everything is alive, there is a magical consciousness that comes along with that I love so much, and that makes my days full of joy and play.
Well, that is true. That's a belief, but they're actually finding out through science that it is, practically true as well.
Yes, that's right. No, it absolutely is. I remember learning in college that, we exchange molecules with everything that we touch. We're constantly exchanging energy with everything, even so-called inanimate objects. And
Yeah.
it makes
That the
perfect
things
sense.
we see as boundaries aren't really there.
That's right.
So,
Exactly.
what is the ancestral feminine and how does it relate to your spiritual path?
Mm. So the ancestral feminine, I, of course, talk about the feminine not just as women. This is a quality that's in everything and everyone. And one of the things that I've learned from studying myth is that these qualities of masculine and feminine are present in symbolic language in myths around the world. And that's an important acknowledgement just because people tend to align the feminine with women, but it's in all of us. And the ancestral feminine has often, because we live in patriarchy, been relegated to this like minimized realm of, not very powerful, maybe just a little bit too gentle, too flowy. And that's not been my experience at all. And encountering the ancestral feminine is a very powerful force. And certainly the old stories tell us that it's vital and important, this partnership between these qualities. So the ancestral feminine is a big part of my path because by reclaiming the ancestral feminine and understanding it, bringing more consciousness to it, looking at archaeology and mythology to try and rebuild these stories that have been suppressed for a long time, we all become empowered by that.
So tell us a little bit about your new book, The Wild Soul Ruins, Reawakening the Ancestral Feminine, and what inspired you to write it?
Well, the book started as a paper, actually, for my PhD program. I was really interested in the origin of the runes because we don't know where they came from. Archaeologically speaking, we're just not sure. There's a lot of theories out there, but when I started looking at the work of Maria Gimbutas and the Old European sacred script, which is prehistoric script that has never been translated. They believe it was a language, or she did. That was one of her theories. But it's never been translated. And I looked at that script and I was like, oh, those are the runes. So we know that there's this ancient symbolic relationship that underlays everything. And that connection with old Europe, which is a very much a partnership-based society, probably matristic in nature, where this was another of Gimbutas's theories. This ancestral feminine then becomes the progenitor, the originator of the runes. And the runes are always attributed to Odin. Everybody's like, oh, Odin brought the runes in. And, it's this, people either argue that it's an alphabet or a magical system. Those who argue it's a magical system tend to say it's from Odin. But the runes are in the well of the Norns. They're in the well of origin, the well that contains the weird. The word for the well is Earth, which is one of the names of the eldest Norn. And this idea that Odin took the runes from the well without a partnership with the Norns, these guardian figures, this triple goddess entity that guards all that was, all that is, and all that would be. That seemed kind of silly to me. He performed a ritual of initiation. He sacrificed himself mythically. And it was through partnership with the ancestral feminine, these very ancient figures that guard the well, that are sometimes seen as spinners and weavers of the weird, that the runes came into being. And so that the book started as a paper exploring those ideas and became a practice of working with the runes in inquiry, not just accepting what other people had to say about them, because again, the historical information we have is extensive, but pretty spotty. It's all over the place. We have some rune poems, we have a lot of archaeological evidence, but we don't know what the runes were exactly or what they mean. And so I wanted to practice with them myself. I coordinated a 33-week-long practice with others, and that practice combined with the paper and some other exercises in ancestral connection became the book, with the intention that the reader can use it to find their own path working with their ancestral feminine with the runes.
Okay. So, can you speak a little bit about disability and chronic illness, how it relates to your ancestral or to ancestral traditions and or the runes?
Sure. One of the things that I studied when I became sick, because anyone who has a chronic illness knows how disheartening it is to be ill in this culture. You immediately get plucked out of every expected thing that you thought was going to happen in your life, and you land someplace entirely other. But what I found was that many spiritual traditions see illness or disability as not a liability, but actually an initiation, where when you go through these experiences, you receive divine information, you receive gifts along the path. And that reframing was essential to me. It still is essential. I just came out of weeks of being really disabled just a couple of weeks ago. And being able to sit in it and say, what is the gift in this experience, instead of being so sad about that loss, that interruption, and so afraid that it might not ever end. That has saved me over and over again. And knowing that my ancestors, I've also looked at archaeology in Northern Europe. There's many finds where they think there were people of significance that had some sort of disability, there's a burial, a very old, it's a Mesolithic burial at Bad Dürrenberg in Germany, where the person was buried with this full regalia, they believe, some sort of spiritual leader. And she had a deformity at the back of her spine that they think maybe allowed her to enter a trance state when she tilted her head to one side. And there's been several other evidences of this, this idea that disability was maybe something that could bring you closer and more into relationship with spirit, because it is an initiation. So it does take you out of the known, the expected, which is the first stage of a rite of passage. And it does put you into the liminal, which is the second stage of a rite of passage. So the question becomes, how do you return? And in returning, I found that by rooting into some of my ancestral practices, like with the runes, I've been able to come back from my periods of disability with more connection and more joy and more information to share with other people on the path.
Okay, that is interesting, and it's interesting to me how what you're saying and how you're explaining things relates to other fields of study that explain the human experience and how we process really our life experiences. Like I'm currently writing a book on resilience. Mm-hmm. And so yes, what you're saying relates very much to studies in that field.
Oh, that's fascinating. It is about the story. That's what I found. I mean, I'm a writer and a storyteller. And so what I've found is if we have a story, that allows us to be empowered even through these difficult, I call them death transitions, the rites of passage, because there is a tremendous amount of loss that occurs in our lives over and over again. And the storyteller Martin Shaw says, he talks about rites of passage as the journey to the underworld. And of course, that's a theme throughout ancient culture, that you have to descend into the realm of the dark goddess, and something has to die there in order for you to ascend and return with new information. And you come back to your community with a new status and a new name and a new role, and you get to celebrate that until the next descent. And that story, that ancient story, has given me so much hope in times where there really wasn't any. Like, modern medicine had no hope for me. You know, my family didn't know what to do with me. My community wasn't really sure what to do with me either. But I had a story. And if you can hang your hat on the story, then you have something that you can work with.
So, what can someone gain by finding their path, their own path through ancestral history?
Well, I'm a big believer in spiritual sovereignty. I think that finding your own path, first of all, it's yours. And I believe that everyone has a path, and everyone has a unique path that is specific to them. We are all descended from survivors. We all come from somewhere. And knowing more about where you come from, knowing the stories of your ancestors, is really important. And I mean all of the stories. I'm not just talking about the good ones, the empowering ones. I'm talking about the really hard ones too, because all of those things make up who we are now. And when you start finding your own people, your own path, and you start learning about your ancestors, synchronicities come into play, because all of these people, they live inside of you. They are what makes you who you are. Your DNA, every composition in your cell is from somewhere. It comes from something. It was informed by circumstances. We know that our brains change when we're exposed to different things throughout our lifetimes. So this work is very individual in that it's healing and connective. And then it also is collectively healing and connective too, because when we're empowered in our own journey and in our own path with our ancestors, then we can meet each other and we can share, and we're not taking from other people. We're not, trying to defer always to spiritual authority, which we know in this culture can be really fraught with a lot of pain and a lot of exploitation. You can be strong in yourself when you have your own path, when you're rooted into your lineages. So that's, to me, a tremendous benefit, because then you can be discerning about all of the other things you come into contact with, and we all benefit from that.
So, what would you recommend to someone wanting to get to know their ancestors and work with the runes?
Well, I always suggest, if people want to work with their ancestors, that they start talking to them. We often, like, I have my ancestors behind me here. These are some of my known ancestors. I put up pictures of them, and I've started doing more genealogical research and asking questions. I have 91-year-old grandparents that I talk to. Yeah, they're amazing. And so getting their stories and then piecing it together. But when I started asking my ancestors about working with them, it was incredible how they showed up. They showed up in dreams. They showed up in, strange synchronicities. People would, give me paperwork that was about the town that my grandfather's family was from. And it's pretty magical when you open that door. So I would say ask. And the same with the runes. If you want to approach the runes, seeing them as beings or seeing them as ancestors, even if you're not an animist and you don't want to see everything as alive, they are definitely an ancestral tool. So it doesn't ever hurt to approach with reverence and just ask, how would you like me to work with you? What kind of relationship can we be cultivating? And I find it treating spirits like people, it goes a long way.
So you mentioned earlier, you mentioned spiritual sovereignty. So why do you feel it's important to connect with that today?
Well, that comes from my own path of being raised in peripheral Christianity in a very like Christian area, and having a lot of alienation and a lot of pain and a lot of rejection on that path because it required so much conformity, and then becoming a student of religion and learning that not all religions have written documents, and so the religions with written documents tend to be prioritized, but my interest has always been in the unwritten, in the oral transmission, and in the things that have been hidden and suppressed, and that's more difficult to find. I also have had a journey, like many people of European descent who live in America and are racialized as white, of cultural appropriation, looking at other traditions outside of my own, especially when I was very young, and again, longing for those unwritten oral transmissions or magical practices and not seeing them in my own lineages. Because they weren't as visible. They're more visible now. But there's a lot of exploitation there too, even if you move outside of cultural appropriation, even in the, the so-called neo-pagan pathway. I feel like being discerning and developing a spiritual path that's based in relationship with the land where I live and with the people in my life and with the spirits of my lineage, it helps me to have more compassion for all people on the path. And it makes me less vulnerable to spiritual exploitation, which I've experienced many times in my journey. And I'm sure anyone on this path has experienced at one point in time or another.
Okay, so what has been most challenging for you in, presenting your research and findings in this area?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the most challenging part is because I am an academic and I have academic training, I tend to bridge kind of multiple worlds here. I definitely am very, like the word used at the beginning was woo-woo. And, I definitely have ideas that could be considered to be out there. I'm always trying to find the interrelationship between the academic, the research-based presentation and the felt sense. So that has been for sure my biggest challenge and also sharing this path with other people, which I'm really passionate about because I didn't have a lot of examples when I was on my searching journey. And I don't want people to follow me. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to say, you have it inside of you too. It is all inside of you. And you don't need to buy a thing. You don't need to attend a seminar. You don't need to go to a class. You just need to listen because the world is constantly wanting to speak with you. And convincing people of their own power is another tremendous challenge because we're taught to be disempowered.
Yeah, that's very true. So, what have you personally gained or benefited most from your study and the personal journey that you've been on?
I think that I know now that I belong to something that is bigger than me and older than me, and that is present here where I live, but also across the world, and that the journeys and lifetimes of all of my ancestors were really important because they brought me to this place here. And I have a duty to honor them going forward in what I do and what I create. So that has been the most tremendous benefit, because feeling like I didn't belong or feeling like I had no part in this great ongoing story that is unfolding for us all, that caused a lot of grief for many years. But I trust it now. I trust that we all belong.
Yes, that's important. That is kind of like a universal need that we all have is. So this is kind of a little off-topic question, but I've been asking all of my guests for a while. So what has surprised you most about life so far?
That's a good question. Oh, what has surprised me most? I'm surprised that so many of the things that I believed were true when I was a little child growing up in the outdoors that I thought I was just making up out of my head are actually real. Like the synchronicities that I'm talking about and the magic that's in the world. I was a child of fairy tales, and I now know that there is an underlayment to all of that. And that has been a wonderful surprise, that all of that comes from this incredible source. And I didn't know that as a kid. I thought that it was just my wanting that would make it real, but it actually is real. That's been a surprise.
Okay, great. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So if the listeners could take one thing away from the show today, what would you want that to be?
I hope if they take one thing, it would be what I said about belonging, that you belong, and your work is only to figure out what's being asked of you in this lifetime, because you are important and everything that you're doing is important. And you come from billions of stories, and you are a story right now.
Okay, great. So how can people connect with you or get your book?
Well, the book is now available everywhere. It came out May 1st, so that's exciting. I have a website, laravesta.co, and that will direct you to my school, the Wild Soul School. I'm pretty active on Instagram, so I'm there at Veleda Vesta, and I would love to see people on Patreon too. That's where I'm definitely give my most time and energy. My Patreon community is really wonderful. So that's patreon.com/Lara Veleda Vesta.
Okay, and they can connect with all of that through your website?
Absolutely.
Okay. And if you forget that, the radio website has a section for guests, and you just scroll down to Lara's name, and her website is listed there. So thank you so much for being here today and talking about this. It's a fascinating topic, definitely.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a great time.
So I do have a quote for the listeners to carry with them through the week, or just to think about. So truth is, life would be a boring experience without the sensuality of women or the feminine energy. And that is said by Lebo Grand. And, I wholeheartedly believe in that. So thank you for listening today. We have another great show planned for next week. Next week, my guest will be Debbie Hampton. And Debbie is the founder of The Best Brain Possible. She's a survivor of severe depression, suicide attempt, and her own journey to finding answers through neuroscience. So we'll talk to her about that and, you know, the whole, I guess, the other side of things, the science of the brain and processing life. So be sure to tune in. That will be July. Let me see. It'll be the second Tuesday in July. So I'm just having trouble remembering my dates today. You know, you probably have those kind of days too. So I'm just going to say bye for now. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Soul Fire Wisdom with Kate Olson. We hope you enjoyed the show. If we made you laugh, brightened your day, or sparked a new thought, we have succeeded in our mission. Join us next time when we'll share more secrets and truths and all the magic of transformation that is the journey to Soul Fire Wisdom. Always remember, be fierce in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire.